Okay, welcome to another sick tutorial. And as in sick, I mean I still have a cold, so I'm recording tutorials for my students as kind of like little mini critiques. And so this one, another student, Kaylee, sent me her file, making really great progress, I think. I'm not going to look at the whole entire animation. I've chosen just this one little scene. I again want to kind of continue to talk about these ideas of timing and spacing. And in this case, kind of timing and spacing also relate to speed, right? We're talking about the timing, and of course spacing would be distance, or distance in between the individual frames. And so we perceive that as speed, or the lack thereof. So there's a couple little things. I've isolated this, so I'm just looking at this one camera. And the storyline here is basically one little boxy character is searching, kind of like hide and go seek, for another little boxy character in this little world of kind of tall cubes, little mini skyscrapers as they were, or cube-like trees. But anyways, so I'm just going to go ahead and play this as just this one shot. And it's in the whole context of the story, it's pretty funny. It's a nice little idea how the story cuts to this. But I think, you know, in looking at the various shots that Kaylee has going on, I think this one in particular, I want to give just a little advice about ways to think about that timing and spacing. And, you know, some of this is, she's being creative with the idea of where is the character. So if this moves into place, right, animates it so that the character kind of comes up all the way here and falls down and kind of stays put. And then, you know, goes back to, actually it moves very quickly to wherever the next shot is going to be, back over at another place. So I'm going to go back to the shaded mode. But the two things that I see here is, given the height of the boxes, and we can't really tell it here, but in the earlier clips, these are rather tall, so it would be quite a jump for our Intrepid Boxy to make it up here. So there certainly should be a pause, you know, where at the top of the jump, the character or anything, because of gravity, kind of stalls out and then goes back down. But there also has to be enough force that it seems like the character, you know, there was enough force to get it up to this point, and also the gravity starts to pull the character down. The other thing too that would happen, and this one's a little more subtle, but especially in this first jump, when you're going to watch this, hopefully you can see my cursor, is the character jumps across here. In fact, let's just go through this. When I play it in full motion, you'll see this, where it seems like the character kind of speeds up in this little section, and then will slow back down. So let's just watch this again, right? See where it kind of like gets to the top, and then all of a sudden it kind of propels itself in air a little bit more. This happens a lot because, you know, Maya's doing a lot of auto smoothing, and you can make an argument based on, you know, wind drag and how something should slow down. But generally when I have a character that's jumping in the air, even though I might animate, so you can see here's the jumps, right? Very obvious what's going on in that space. The other thing I might do, or that I would suggest doing, is in this space, let's look at the Z. So the Z is kind of flat, right? So it's not moving anywhere on a depth. It's just moving side to side in this case, which makes it really easy. But and this would be same if you did basically have animations on the X and the Z, if there was changes in those, if there was translation going on. I would say in between any of these, anytime the jump, so if the character is jumping and then this is point A and it's going to point B, even though actually the character doesn't land on the ground the way this is set up in the scene, we don't want it to have an imaginary jetpack that allows it to glide or move faster or slower during the jump. Once it jumps, that's kind of it, right? It's propelled itself forward to do whatever it's going to do, and the force that's being applied would be gravity, and that would have a lot to do with the up or the down. So what I tend to do is just anything that happens in between the jump, I just delete those keyframes. Then the other thing here is I would break these tangents, and I'm going to select this one, and I could do it by hand, or underneath the little widgets here, you can see linear tangents. So in essence, I'm just going to make this a straight line. So again, I want these doing whatever they're doing because I don't want to change this stuff over here and this stuff. But in between this spot here, I just want, where's that? I'm going to break that tangent, and then I'm going to select this tangent handle, and I'll make that linear. So this is just a straight line that happens in between here. But with the whole idea that we want to kind of take a little bit of that out of there, hopefully that will make sense. There's a little bit of this happening in the X curve, or the Y curve itself. We're going to change that. But anytime you have these jumps back and forth, I would just treat these as a straight line. In fact, I'm going to do this one as well. Let's just make sure I'm on the right frames. That's where it comes up, and yep, it ends right there. So let's just delete those. And again, select both of them. Break, I'll select this tangent handle and do linear, and I'll select that one. And of course, you select the keyframe, and then I have to select the individual handle, because I only want to affect this one, right? And I'll make that straight. Okay. So we deal with this quite a bit in the bouncing ball exercise, because we don't want the ball to kind of pause in midair and then speed up in the X or the Z in the direction that it's going, right? So we got rid of a little bit of that. The bigger part of this is the speed of the up and down, right? So let's go back and let's just look at the Y translate. So Kaylee's already done a really good job of breaking the tangents here. Well, this one's kind of steep. I'll go ahead and just do it so it's just individual. We leave that one where it is. Is that one the same? Yeah, let's go ahead and just make sure those are broken. But these are doing what we want, basically, right? Is it comes up here. But I do think it's a little slower. So keeping this in mind, we could, if this is the peak of that jump, we could also get a little mathematical about this. How many frames does it take to go from 267? So that's 9 frames. And what was that one? So it's about 10 frames. So it's a little bit longer on the cycle coming down than the other. That's okay. I mean, you could leave it there. I'm just going to tweak it back just a frame so I can find kind of a midpoint here. The bigger thing, though, is instead of tweaking these, to get more speed out of it and modifying this handle, So like, oh, what if I make it a little steeper? You can see if I make it too steep, then I get the coming to the peak, right? It comes to the peak and it goes up. That's kind of wrong, right? So let's not do that. But we want to change the timing, right? And the spacing. So what I'm going to do is if I need this to go faster, let's just increase the amount of distance that it has to cover to get to that point. So, sorry, a little hotkey I'm doing here. So I've selected all these keyframes, and I don't want to move them in time back and forth. I just want to move them in value, which would be straight down. So if I hold down the Shift key first, and if I hold down the middle mouse button, it constrains it, right? It won't go side to side. You can see even the arrow shows me that it is only going to move up and down. So I'm just going to guess at this point, like what that should be. And I'm going to go ahead and modify this just a little bit, right? So I get a little more peak out of that. This one's nice and flat. Just for the sake of argument, I'm going to delete that one, just so I can deal with these just on their own, though you certainly could have a keyframe there, like Kaylee does, to help shape these. Sometimes you get to the point where it's just too difficult to get the curvature that you want in that arc as this is happening in this jump. So sometimes you need to hand place some keyframes in here to get it to look exactly like you want. There's limitations exactly how much shaping you can do with that. So let's go back and play this and see if we did anything. So I'd say a little bit better, right? It has a little more speed. Let's go ahead and just do the extreme. Remember I talked about the Price is Right game. Let's just see what we get out of this. So I think that speed is a little bit better. But the other thing too is it doesn't really pause up here as much as I would want. So now that I've increased that distance, I have a little more room to really crank that handle. And again, if I wanted to, I could come in there and put some individual keyframes. Let's try to get this as this big, fat top on the curve here, right? I don't want to go too far or else I get that little problem that we talked about. So the nice thing is you can see as it comes up, the one thing I like maybe a little bit more is it comes into the screen, but I like how it falls quickly. All right, it gets a sense that gravity is taking over. So again, we can come in here, we'll try a couple. Let's just put a little, let's insert a keyframe there, and I'm just moving the time slider to a place where I want to insert a keyframe, and then I'm gonna right click and just say insert key, right? And this is the curve that I'm working on in this. This is the only one that's active, right? So that's the only one that's gonna have the curves. So let's just move that over just a little bit. And this one as well. So you can see I'm really trying to make this kind of fat U shape out of it. And I honestly, I don't know how this is gonna work. It might make it worse. I kind of liked what was going on, but I'm gonna give it a try here. So it's just clipping right there. So I'm not so sold on those two there. I'm gonna delete them. I think this works because by this point in the curve, it's falling, but it's falling real quick, right? You can see it really disappears. But it has a little better sense of the gravity. Now, you know, every scene's gonna be a little bit different. And maybe you might explore something like this and be like, well, Dane's kind of right, but I want it to pause a little bit longer there, you know, for comedic effect. So that's totally fine, but I would question these things. You know, as you look at your timing and spacing, it's easy enough to just save a version, right, and come back to it and try a couple of little things and see if you get the sense of the gravity and the motion, right? I moved it just up. Maybe I'll just move it down just a smidge more. But in changing that distance, I'm affecting timing and spacing the whole entire way, right? That idea of speed. So anyways, there we go. 12-minute little tutorial. I'll post this for you all. Hopefully this was helpful.